Yo, what's up everyone? This video we're going to look at my final thoughts for week number 2. So just going to go through each position, give you guys some players that I like a lot, recap my core. Not much has changed, but let's get right into it, give you my final thoughts heading into this week. So before we start, appreciate it if you drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel as well. And if you want to join us for this week, you can visit the website, links in the description. Or if you did get a week pass for week 1, you are going to have access for this week automatically, so no need to purchase again. But let's start off here at quarterback. At the top, you have Patrick Mahomes at 7,500. He is super expensive, $800 more expensive than the next guy in Lamar Jackson. The matchup is great against Oakland. He has the highest floor and highest ceiling of any quarterback on a weekly basis. I don't mind paying up for him if you can get some cheap plays in the wide receiver position or even at tight end. I think he's a good play. Obviously, a great play at quarterback. If you're going cheaper at quarterback, I think in this, right here, you have some top quarterbacks in Rodgers and Brady and, Prescott's not a top quarterback, but he's definitely above average. Out of those three, I like Prescott, then Rodgers and Brady. Brady's gonna probably dominate this week, but if they're ahead by so much, then there's no need for them to go to the pass that often. And if they're ahead by multiple touchdowns in the fourth quarter, I won't be shocked if Bill Belichick pulls him, just because there's no need to have Tom Brady out there and when the game's already decided. And I could see a good game, good performance from him through the air, but I'm also thinking he's not going to need to throw the ball a ton in this one. And then if you're going cheaper here, I like guys like Jimmy Garoppolo. He sticks out. Jared Goff at 5,900. He's a great play. But I still am absolutely enthralled with Josh Allen at 5,300. Just found myself hard to not play him this week. Super cheap. Gives you monstrous upside with his legs. Last season, he had multiple 90-plus yard rushing performances. He had a bunch of rushing touchdowns. He has a cannon for an arm. He's a great chance to throw for 250, maybe 300-plus yards this week against this really bad Giants secondary. He's a little reckless with the ball, but, with that comes some aggressive playmaking. And we know the Bills, they still trust him. Even if he plays pretty poorly, he's still going to be the quarterback. Nobody's going to, no reason to think he's going to get benched if he struggles. But I don't think he's going to struggle at all this week against the Giants. I expect him to absolutely crush at a 53 price tag. And then I like Matthew Stafford as well at 52. I think there's a lot of cheap quarterbacks this week. If you don't want to pay up, you can save at quarterback and then spend up at running back or wide receiver. Stafford, I think, is probably the best tournament play because with Josh Allen right above him at $100 more, he's going to probably get no ownership, but he still has pretty big upside. He's healthy. We know he has a really good arm. It's always been his health. Last season, he had a back injury, which obviously affects him as a quarterback, throwing the ball. But this year, I like what they've done with the offense. They have some veteran players with Danny Amendola. They have a young tight end that has the potential to be one of the best in the league in Hutchinson. They have speed guy and Marvin Jones. They have a number one guy in Kenny Golladay. So their offense is really good. We know the Lions, mostly every year they like to throw the ball a bunch with Stafford. They're not a very heavy ground and pound team. So we know Stafford's going to have to chuck it. And against the Chargers, I expect him to have to throw the ball a lot against that defense. And then you could even go with a guy like Derek Carr here. Should be a high-scoring game. He's going to have to throw the ball to keep up with Patrick Mahomes in that offense. He obviously is not a super safe play, but he's very cheap at 51, and he can still be efficient. Last week he was 22 of 26, and he's had some high completion percentage games. And so he's also a very viable option down here. So if you're looking cheap, those are the guys I like. If you're paying up, it's going to be Mahomes. And if you're looking here in the mid-range, I think Prescott's fine, Rodgers is fine, even Garoppolo's in a decent spot. So that's what I like at quarterback. At running back, at the top, I love Alvin Kamara. If you're paying up for just one running back, I would go Kamara, Barkley, then Elliott. Kamara, just love the matchup for him against the Rams. It's going to be a high-scoring shootout. Last week, he had a huge game, but no touchdowns. That's not going to happen very often now that Ingram's gone. He just got a couple touchdowns, taken away from him in a way. With Murray got one on the ground, then near the goal line they went with the Taysom Hill touchdown, and they also had Traquan Smith. So their touchdowns came from guys that you're not expecting to have huge touchdown performance, had huge touchdown seasons. Unlike a guy like Kamara, you do expect him to have probably 15 to 20 touchdowns at least. 8,200 in a matchup against the Rams. Sign me up for that. Dalvin Cook's a decent option here, 72. He's not as cheap as he was week 1. I still think he's going to get a lot of ownership after his week 1 performance. The matchup is a lot tougher here against the Packers, but it's not a terrible matchup at all. In Green Bay, the Vikings really did go to the ground, and if they stick with that, then he's going to have a good game. But I think it was also due to the game script. They were ahead by multiple touchdowns for basically the entire game, so there was no reason for them to go to the pass that much. So I don't expect Dalvin Cook to get as much work, but I think he's still a fine play at 72. I don't see myself really going there, though, because we have cheaper options that I like a lot. Some cheap running backs you can look at are Chris Carson at 64. He's cheap. Sony Michel had a really bad game. I think he's going to be popular this week. If that's the case, I won't mind not having him because we have Eckler at 61 below him. Mark Ingram is questionable, although he full practiced, so more than likely he's going to play. I like Derrick Henry a lot, so I see myself right here in the 6,000 range with guys like Eckler and Henry. They're some of my favorite plays. Even a guy like Marlon Mack, who's going to get a bunch of work on the ground now that the Colts made that big change at quarterback with Brissett. He's not getting much action at all in the receiving game, but I could see him have a really good game on the ground because we know the work's going to be there and he's going to get the goal line looks, goal line rushes. So he's a decent option here as well. So lots of guys right here at 6K or a little below 6K to look at. Now we're with some injury situations here. If Joe Mixon is out, then you got to look at a guy like Gio Bernard here. Bernard is definitely going to be very appealing because he gets a lot of work through the air as well as on the ground. And if he's the number 1 back against the 49ers defense, he could definitely have a solid game at a $5,300 price tag. Same thing with Matt Breida, although he's not as safe because they do have another running back there in Mossad, and he did take away some of his Mostert, and he did take away some of his rushes even when Coleman got hurt. So I don't expect him to get as many touches as people think. Probably 15 to 20 is to expect, probably 15-ish. But I think, if I had to pick between them, I'll go with Bernard if Mixon is indeed out. White's also very cheap here. Only had 4 rushes, but he's much more of a pass-catching back with 7 targets. He's really appealing against the Dolphins. And besides them, you could go to a guy like Josh Jacobs here, although this could be a game that you need to have a shootout. I expect this game to be a shootout. And if they are trailing by multiple touchdowns, I don't see them running the ball 25 times. So I think he's a really good point per dollar play. Just don't know if the ceiling's going to be there in a matchup against the Chiefs. And that's kind of it. That's where I'm looking at running back. I really like this 6,000 range. You're getting guys with a lot of upside at very cheap prices, just like last week when Dalvin Cook was just 6,000. I like the prices on Mack, Henry, Eckler, even Ingram a lot. So that's where I'm really going. And then Kamara, I think he's too cheap. At the receiver position, we have the premier matchup with Jalen Ramsey and Hopkins. Hopkins is matchup proof if you want to go to him. No problem there. I would rather go to guys like Michael Thomas at 8,000. He got a bunch of catches, 13 targets, no touchdowns, but he had 123 yards compared to Hopkins also got a bunch of targets too, but he also had a couple drops, so he could have even had a bigger game, but he also had multiple touchdowns. I think it's pretty much a coin toss between those two. I'll lean to Thomas just given the matchup. Adams, I like him to bounce back this week. Last season, his first week was a really tough matchup against the Bears. They have the best defense in the league. It's a little easier matchup against the Vikings this week, although the Vikings are still a pretty good defense. I think he's in a great bounce back spot at 77. And then with the injuries the Chargers are dealing with, Keenan Allen's going to get a lot more love from Phillip Rivers. But just highlighting some of my favorite ones instead of talking about each one. I'll go with Juju Smith at 75. I like him a bunch at that price tag at home. Ben Roethlisberger has always played a lot better at home. The Seattle defense not as good as it was in years past. I like him a bunch. Watkins is still my favorite guy just because he's cheap. Love the matchup here against against the Raiders. Should be a high-scoring game, at least from the Chiefs. They should put up a bunch of points. I like Watkins, my first guy, then Juju. Watkins, Thomas, Juju, and if you're going even cheaper, I'm not going to have Antonio Brown this week just because I don't really trust the workload. And if you're going cheaper at wide receiver, I like a guy like Gallup at 56. I like the price tag on him. He's getting a bunch of work, playing a bunch of the snaps, almost all the snaps at the receiver position. If you're playing John Brown, great to stack with Josh Allen. I like him a bunch. Sterling Shepard is out, so that's going to be more work for a lot of just other bad receivers on the team. It makes me like the Bills' defense a little bit more just because that offense is looking really bad except for Barkley. And then my cheap wide receivers this week are going to be I think John Ross is a good cheap option at 46. I love Tyrell Williams at 44, just too cheap in a matchup where they're going to have to throw the ball a bunch. DK Metcalf, with some of the injuries the Seattle's dealing with, he could have a breakout game this week. He had 89 yards in week 1 on 6 targets. Could see that target share go up. He has the big body that he's going to get a lot of the red zone looks as well. And that's kind of it. So if you're going cheap, I'm liking Metcalf, Williams, and Ross. If you're going mid-range, John Brown is the guy for me. And if you're paying up, I like Watkins, Michael Thomas, Juju, even Amari against the against the Redskins defense. At tight end, there's 4 guys that I really like, or 5 guys. There's Travis Kelce. I like a Kelce, Watkins, Mahomes stack. Those 2 are going to get a lot of the work offensively with Tyreek Hill out for multiple weeks. He's just so cheap. Number 1 tight end. One of the best tight ends in the league. I mean, not cheap, but just so much upside with him at 7,300. He has wide receiver 1 upside at a tight end position. I like Kittle to bounce back. He was good in week 1, had 10 targets. He had 2 touchdowns that got called back due to penalties, which would have added on, made his stat line look a lot more appealing. But he has the ability to break 100 yards against his Bengals defense at a 6,800 price. Evan Ingram, the matchup's not great against the Bills, but he should get 14, 15 targets again this week with no Shepard, with just some of the injuries at the wide receiver position. He's the number 1 target by far for this week for Eli Manning. And then if you're going cheap, there are 2 guys that I like a lot, and that's Delaney Walker at 3,500 against the Colts defense. He's always been a top target of Mariota. He had 2 touchdowns in week 1 against the Browns, and now the matchup is still fine against the Colts defense. And I had 2 other guys. Waller here at 3,300. Just going to be it's going to be a high-scoring game from the Chiefs. The Raiders, they could absolutely get blown off, or they could stay in this game. The way to stay in this game is to throw the ball, and a guy like Waller is a good tight end. Without Jared Cook there this year, he's the number 1 guy, and at 3,300, he has upside. And then Hutchinson is the last guy at 3,000, just so much upside at the tight end position. He absolutely dominated in college, got that 8th overall selection, and first game, nobody's really had a better performance in like 40, 50 years at the tight end position than he did in his debut. Monster upside, makes a good connection with Stafford. Stafford likes to hone in on tight ends when he has a good one, and Hutchinson is a very good tight end. So I like him. Waller and Walker are the ways to go if you're going cheap. If you're paying up, Kittle and Kelce and Ingram. So those are the 6 that I would just play in my player pool. And that's it for this week. At defense, just quickly go over that. The cheapest defense that I would go with this week is probably, let's see, there's probably going to be not a ton here, maybe 2,700 for like the Broncos. I think that's a decent option. I think if you want to go with the Jags defense, it's obviously risky, but the Jags do have some talent on the defensive end. And if we know how bad the Houston offensive line is, they could put some pressure on Watson, get some sacks, maybe get some turnovers. They're risky, but they're very cheap. Very rare they're going to get the Jags that cheap of a defense. But I like them. I like the Broncos. I like the 49ers. And then I think the Titans are a fine option against the Colts. And if you want to pay up at defense, I think the Bills, with that mess that the Giants are offensively, at 34. And the top defense are probably going to be the Patriots or the Bears. So, yeah, that's kind of it for this week. I'll just go ahead and pencil my core in once again if you missed it. But thanks for watching. I appreciate it. The core is pretty much the same. I haven't changed much at all. Still like Josh Allen, Kamara, going with Eckler. Eckler at the just only 6,100 is so cheap for the upside that he has. At the receiver position, going John Brown to stack here. John Brown, flex, I had Tyrell Williams. Tyrell Williams. And Sammy Watkins. Just feel like you get a bunch of upside here at every single position. And you're getting at some great prices on guys like Williams, Brown, Kamara, Eckler, Allen. Watkins is not cheap, but he's the number one receiver from now until Tyreek Hill comes back. So you got to pay that price tag. And he's not even super expensive either. But that's it. Hopefully you guys crush it this week. Thanks for watching, and good luck.